James had always believed that space travel was about routine. Check the navigation logs, recalibrate the engines, and make sure the coffee synth didn't produce something that could double as an industrial cleaner. Tonight, however, routine had been rudely interrupted by a sound that was both subtle and unnerving, a faint, deliberate tapping echoing through the metal corridors of his ship. He glanced at the ship's AI console, which blinked back with its usual deadpan indifference, as if mocking him silently. "Probably just a maintenance bot," he muttered, trying to convince himself, though the tap-tap pattern was eerily too rhythmic to be mechanical. Or, he added, voice cracking slightly, a space poltergeist with commitment issues. The corridor stretched ahead in dim green lighting, the shadows bouncing along the riveted panels, making every corner seem like it might be hiding something or someone. James gripped the nearest handrail as if its cold steel could anchor him in sanity. He rounded a corner and froze. There, leaning casually against a bulkhead with the elegance of someone who clearly didn't belong in a maintenance corridor, was a woman. She looked human enough at first glance, tall, with long hair falling in smooth waves and a posture that suggested confidence rather than intrusion. But then he noticed the ears, longer than usual, tapering at the tips like an artful exaggeration of human anatomy. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and blinked again. Hi," he said. "Are you part of the new AI crew update?" His tone was meant to be light, humorous, a protective shell against the shiver creeping up his spine. She lifted an eyebrow and the faint curve of her lips hinted at amusement. "I am not an AI," she said, her voice melodic, tinged with something that made him want to lean in and simultaneously step back. "I am Lyra." James swallowed. "Lyra," he repeated. The name sounded too soft, too elegant for a maintenance corridor. "Nice to meet you, Lyra. I'm James. James the space janitor or, navigator, whatever." He waved his hands vaguely at the ceiling as if that could cover any embarrassment. Lyra tilted her head as if analyzing him. "James," she said, savoring the syllables, "you smell interesting." He coughed awkwardly. "That's probably the synth coffee. It's acidic, very acidic, but in a good way." His laugh was nervous, though he caught himself before it fully escaped into a panic giggle. She stepped closer, just enough that the dim light glinted off something sharp at the corner of her mouth. He froze. Not a threat exactly, but enough to make the hair on his neck stand at attention. "Relax," she said, noticing his frozen posture. "I am not here to harm you yet." Her tone had a teasing lilt that made James suspect she might enjoy scaring space engineers for fun. He tried to joke. "Yet, huh? Well, that's reassuring, really. I always dreamed of meeting a potentially dangerous humanoid with questionable intentions. Check that off my bucket list." Lyra's laugh was soft, almost musical, and James had the immediate and irrational thought that maybe danger could smell better than coffee. She pushed off the wall and walked toward the ship's viewport, peering out at the stars that stretched endlessly in the black void. "Space is lonely," she said quietly, "even for humans who think they're alone in it." James, eager to lighten the moment, leaned against the opposite wall. "Yeah, loneliness in zero gravity is, well, it floats around a lot. Kind of like socks after laundry day." He chuckled at his own joke, but she only turned to him, expression inscrutable. "Do you always speak like that?" she asked. "Speak like what?" he replied. "Space janitors are required to maintain morale through corny metaphors and bad puns. It's a policy." She tilted her head again, this time more sharply, and he caught the first subtle change in her eyes. They darkened slightly, not frighteningly, but enough to make the dim light flicker against crimson hints. James swallowed. I just realized I've never met anyone with eyes like yours. Are those contacts special lighting?" "Vampire cosplay?" He laughed, though it came out half-choked. Lyra smirked. "Something like that," she said. Then, in a motion too fluid to be entirely human, she leaned closer and flicked her tongue against her teeth, just enough that he noticed a sharp glint. "I am different," she admitted, her voice softening, "but not entirely dangerous." James tripped over a loose maintenance hatch as he stepped back, arms flailing. He landed on his backside, arms still waving like a conductor of a chaotic symphony. "See?" he exclaimed, lying on the cold metal floor. "I am perfectly capable of handling potentially dangerous humanoids, totally in control." Lyra's laugh echoed through the corridor, a light, airy sound that made his chest tighten oddly, not fear exactly, but something close to fascination. The AI console beeped as if mocking the scene. Warning, ambient hilarity exceeding recommended human levels, it noted. James groaned. Even the AI thinks this is absurd. Lyra crouched, her long ears brushing the metallic floor, and offered him a hand. You will survive, she said with a grin, but you might find yourself enjoying it. He took her hand, which was warm and firm, and felt an irrational mix of relief and dread. Great, he muttered, standing with a grunt. Because I was really hoping my first encounter with a possibly vampiresque alien wouldn't involve acrobatics and awkward jokes. She straightened, tilting her head as if studying him. You have spirit, she said. It makes this interesting. James chuckled nervously. Spirit, huh? Does that mean I get a medal or just a lifetime subscription to panic attacks? Lyra's eyes shimmered faintly, reflecting the distant stars. Perhaps both, she said. The universe has a sense of humor, you will see. The corridor lights flickered again, and James realized the tapping sound had returned, softer this time, almost playful. He glanced at Lyra. Should we investigate, or is this the part where I get eaten and then make an oddly inappropriate joke as my last words? She smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of her lips. You will live if only to see what happens next. You may find it shocking. James groaned, muttering under his breath, great, space elf vampire, and I thought paperwork was dangerous. Lyra laughed, the sound oddly grounding amidst the cold metal and endless stars, and together they stepped deeper into the corridor, the shadows of the ship stretching long and curious, as though even the walls were intrigued by what was about to unfold. The next morning, James woke to the rhythmic hum of the ship's engines and the smell of burnt coffee. Not his fault, he hadn't checked the synth settings after the last energy surge, but the aroma hit his senses like a small, unpleasant betrayal. Groaning, he rolled out of the bunk, narrowly avoiding stepping on a loose panel, and muttered, Nothing says interstellar hero like surviving both your breakfast and your ship's floor hazards. The corridors were quiet, almost too quiet, until a soft, deliberate chuckle echoed behind him. He spun around and froze. Lyra stood there, arms crossed, her posture casual as if she had been waiting just to watch him trip over his own legs. Her ears twitched slightly, and he caught a subtle glimmer in her eyes that made him reconsider whether coffee would be enough to stabilize his nerves today. Good morning, James, she said. You look slightly less panicked than yesterday. Progress. I'll take it, he said, straightening a panel of his uniform that had twisted during sleep. Though I still maintain that the coffee synth is plotting against me, it has a vendetta. Probably because I keep telling it tastes like alien sludge. Lyra tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made him wish for a distraction. You have humor in moments of danger, she noted. It is unusual. I call it survival technique number 1, he replied. Number 2 is screaming, preferably at things that are obviously terrifying. Number 3 is making puns about vampires. Helps with morale, sort of. He gestured vaguely at her elongated ears and the faint, almost imperceptible fangs at the corner of her smile. For example, I was thinking of calling you Count Elfula. Too much. She chuckled, the sound low and musical, making him feel like the floor might slide out from under him for no reason. Not enough, she said. You underestimate your wit. James gave a mock bow. I live to amuse, and occasionally survive encounters with beings that could easily end my life before breakfast. The ship's AI beeped in its usual dry tone. Observation. Humor levels dangerously high for a first contact scenario. Recommendation, continue for psychological stability. See, James said, pointing at the console. Even the AI agrees I'm a professional. Lyra stepped closer, her movement fluid, almost unnatural. The light caught her eyes, and the red tint that had flickered before became more pronounced. James' stomach dropped, and he reflexively clutched the handrail. Oh, are you shifting again? Because I think the coffee wasn't enough prep for this level of vampire elf chic. She laughed. I am not fully transformed yet, but I can control it mostly. Mostly, James echoed, his eyes widening as the tiniest hint of fang flashed again. He muttered under his breath, mostly is never a good metric for life or health insurance. Lyra grinned at his comment. Do you always speak like this? She asked, voice teasing. I could grow accustomed to it. You'd better, he said, gesturing at her ears. Because surviving the vampire elf is going to be a full-time job, I accept applications for assistance. Benefits include, continued survival and occasional witty banter. The tension eased slightly as they moved toward the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the reinforced glass, their cold light reflecting in Lyra's eyes, making the red flecks shimmer like distant suns. "You are fascinated," she said softly, more statement than question. James shrugged, pretending to be casual while his pulse skipped. "Curiosity is part of the job description, right? That and worrying about things that can leap 20 feet in zero gravity and possibly eat me." She tilted her head, amused. "And yet you do not run." "Running is overrated," he said. "Also, zero gravity makes you look ridiculous while sprinting. Trust me, I've tested it. Very scientific experiment." Lyra's laugh was low, teasing. "You are entertaining." James grinned despite the tension curling in his stomach. "I aim to please and to survive, mostly survive." Their banter was interrupted by a sudden warning siren. The ship's lights flickered as the hull shuddered from an external impact. James' stomach dropped into his boots if he were wearing any. Lyra's posture shifted instantly, alert and predatory, her ears twitching. The subtle changes in her eyes deepened, crimson highlighting the human-like white. "Asteroid cluster," the AI announced flatly. "Recommended immediate evasive maneuvers." James yelped. "Evasive maneuvers? Do we get points for style while running for our lives? Because I'm thinking space cartwheel maybe." Lyra didn't answer verbally. She moved with inhuman grace, balancing perfectly along the narrow walkway while her gaze calculated angles and trajectories with precision beyond any human skill. James scrambled after her, trying to keep up, tripping over handrails and somehow managing to knock over a maintenance drone. "It's all part of the entertainment," he yelled. "Zero-gravity slapstick survival." She turned briefly, a flash of amusement crossing her sharp features. "You are clumsy," she noted, voice soft but carrying a hint of humor, but persistent. James barely managed a nod, gripping a railing as the ship rocked from another impact. "Persistence is my middle name," he said breathlessly. "Actually, it's Gerald, but I prefer persistence. Sounds heroic." The asteroid impacts intensified, and Lyra's transformations became more pronounced. Her movements blurred between human and something sharper, faster, more fluid. James watched in awe and terror, tripping again as she guided him safely through the chaos. Every time he glanced at her, the contrast of her elegance with his flailing limbs made him snort a laugh that was almost hysterical. "Note to self," he muttered, "heroism in zero gravity requires two things: balance and a ridiculous sense of humor." She caught his gaze, the red in her eyes flashing brightly for a heartbeat before she smiled. "You amuse me," she said, "and that may save you." James coughed, amusement my superpower. Right after surviving improbable alien encounters. The ship finally cleared the asteroid field. Alarms ceased, lights stabilized, and James slumped against the wall, utterly spent. Lyra landed gracefully beside him, crouching just enough that her long ears brushed the floor. "You did well," she said softly. "I survived," James panted, trying to catch his breath while brushing imaginary dust off his uniform. "Barely, but in style mostly, also probably with mild internal injuries." Lyra's eyes softened. "You are not as weak as I expected." "I prefer the term charmingly persistent," James said. "Much better for marketing purposes." For a moment, they just stared at the endless stars beyond the viewport. James could feel the strange pull between them, a tension that was part fear, part fascination, part something else entirely. And yet he laughed quietly to himself because even in the midst of chaos he found himself joking. Lyra tilted her head and the faint glint of fangs caught the light. "You may find that your jokes will keep you alive longer than any skill," she said. James nodded, grinning despite his exhaustion. "Then let's hope my sense of humor is as indestructible as your, elegant predatory grace. Otherwise, this is going to get awkward." Lyra laughed again, soft and musical, and together they stepped into the next corridor, their footsteps a strange dance between predator and protector, humor and danger, fascination and survival. The alarm blared across the ship, a jagged, urgent sound that rattled James' teeth despite the reinforced cabin. He scrambled to his feet, bumping into the console and swearing under his breath. Lyra was already moving, faster than any human should be able to, her elongated ears twitching as she assessed the new threat. A rogue swarm of asteroid-sized drones, drifting like metallic sharks in the void, their sensors locked on the ship. "Brace yourself," she said, voice calm but charged with that undercurrent of danger that always made James' stomach somersault. "Or don't, your choice." "I'll brace myself in spirit," James shouted, rolling as a panel flung past him. "Though my bones might disagree with my enthusiasm?" He grabbed the nearest rail and flailed along the hallway, trying desperately to keep pace with Lyra's movements, which seemed almost too smooth, too precise for gravity to restrain. "By the way," he added, "I'm starting to think your mostly harmless disclaimer doesn't cover actual chaos." Lyra flicked her eyes toward him, crimson flecks flashing. "Mostly means you'll live," she said almost dryly as she vaulted across the corridor with a fluid grace that defied physics. "Try to keep up, humorist." James did his best, but as usual his attempts ended in a slapstick series of tumbles, knocking over a console and narrowly avoiding being flattened by a swinging maintenance arm. "I swear," he panted, "if I survive this, I'm filing a complaint with Intergalactic Occupational Safety." Lyra's laugh cut through the alarm, sharp and musical. "You are entertaining even in peril," she said. "That may be your advantage." The drones approached, their metallic forms reflecting starlight as they closed in like a school of predatory fish. Lyra's posture shifted subtly, a predatory elegance taking over her human guise. Her ears stretched slightly, and her fangs glinted just enough to make James' brain short-circuit in equal parts fear and fascination. She moved, twisting midair, and jammed a pulse emitter into the nearest drone, causing it to explode in a harmless but spectacular fireworks of sparks. James scrambled to his feet, breathing hard, and tried to mimic her movements. "I am definitely not aerodynamic," he yelled, flailing as another drone skidded past him. "Lyra, do you have a handbook? Or a YouTube tutorial for surviving vampire elves in zero gravity?" "You survive by improvising," she said over her shoulder, a grin on her lips as she launched herself toward another drone, her motions almost balletic. "And by having a ridiculous sense of humor, apparently." James took a deep breath, the panic inside him turning into something else, determination, tempered with that absurd sense of comedy that had carried him this far. He spotted a console panel labeled Drone Override. With a running leap, he crashed into it, accidentally activating a magnetic pulse that sent several drones spinning into space like pinwheels. "Ha!" he shouted. "Who's laughing now?" "Definitely me." Lyra landed beside him, crouched low, and regarded him with a new respect. "You have adapted," she said softly, "better than I expected." James wiped sweat from his brow, chest heaving. "Adapted, that's generous. I call it extreme improvisation under stress, and the occasional miracle." The final wave of drones approached, but together they moved as a coordinated, improbable team. Lyra's movements were deadly precise, James unpredictably human, a combination that sent drones spiraling off course, deactivated, or otherwise neutralized. By the time the last drone drifted harmlessly past the ship, James leaned against a railing, panting, and gave a shaky thumbs up. "We did it, somehow." Lyra landed lightly beside him, letting her elongated ears brush against the floor. "Yes," she said, "you did more than survive, you contributed." James looked at her, and for the first time, the fear that had been a constant companion in her presence melted into something warmer, complicated, and infinitely more human. "Contributed, huh? That sounds heroic, or at least mildly competent." He managed a weak grin. "You are more than that," she said, her crimson eyes softening. "You are remarkable." James blinked. "Remarkable. I just made jokes and fell over a lot. That's my usual charm." Lyra leaned closer, so close he could feel her breath, human-like but subtly alien in its intensity. "Charm may keep you alive," she said, voice low and intimate. "But curiosity, courage, and humor, those make you extraordinary." He chuckled nervously. "Extraordinary, huh? I was going for mediocre hero. Somewhere between clumsy navigator and accidental space janitor." She smiled, the red flecks in her eyes glimmering in the light of distant stars. "You have changed," she said. "The fear that once ruled you now coexists with courage. The laughter you used to protect yourself now inspires hope. You see the danger, yet you do not flee. You understand?" She paused, her eyes locking on his. "The balance between predator and protector." James felt a warmth he didn't understand. I think I understand," he said slowly. And I think I've learned that surviving doesn't always mean running. Sometimes it means laughing in the face of lasers, rogue drones, and slightly terrifying space elves. Lyra laughed, soft and melodic. Slightly terrifying is still accurate, she admitted, but you have grown. James smirked, leaning on the railing. I grew, I think, from terrified janitor to, well, still terrified but slightly more competent. Also, probably hilarious in zero gravity. She studied him, eyes glinting, and then, for the first time, fully shifted. Her form elongated, sleek and elegant, ears reaching higher, fangs fully visible, her body moving with the fluidity of a predator honed for both elegance and lethal precision. Yet, despite the transformation, she did not attack. She stood beside him, guardian and predator intertwined. James blinked. Okay, wow, I feel like I need a manual for this level of elegance and menace. Lyra laughed, reaching out to touch his shoulder lightly, a gesture both human and alien. You survived not because you are like me, she said, but because you remained yourself. Humor, courage, curiosity, that is your strength. He nodded slowly, understanding more than he had at the beginning of this journey. I guess surviving a vampire elf in space teaches you a lot about yourself, he said. Mostly that falling over a lot can actually save your life. And that maybe some things are worth sticking around for. Lyra's gaze softened, and for the first time James felt the alien woman in front of him not as a threat, but as a companion, someone who had changed as much as he had. And you, she said, have changed more than you realize. The ship's engines hummed steadily, the stars stretched endlessly beyond the reinforced viewport, and James realized that space, which once felt so isolating, was now full of possibilities, danger, laughter, and connection. He had faced fear, witnessed the extraordinary, and discovered courage in the most unexpected places. James took a deep breath, a genuine smile spreading across his face. All right, he said, turning to Lyra. So, what now? Spacewalks, more rogue drones, or do we just try to survive the next coffee synth malfunction? Lyra laughed again, stepping closer, ears brushing against his shoulder. We move forward, she said, together. Curiosity, courage, and humor intact. The universe still has surprises for us, but now we face them as allies. James grinned, heart racing, the terror of the past giving way to exhilaration and newfound confidence.